Let me start with this. Is Alabama the best team ever? I have no idea. There's a bunch of Miami Hurricanes had a couple teams with 13 NFL. I thought LSU last year was the deepest team I'd ever seen. But let me just say this. I didn't love Ohio State's game plan. First of all, defensively. Steve Sarkisian had a nice night. The announcers made it sound like he was Elon Musk. Like, it wasn't that complicated. He put Devontae Smith in motion a lot. Yeah. The orbital motion, the Lincoln Riley stuff. I didn't love Ohio State's defensive game plan.
It's interesting, and I know Ryan really well. And every time, so it's been twice now, but when they lost to Clemson, he talked to me at length in the offseason last year about really diving deep and evaluating three areas of your team. And really, this is every team. If you need an evaluation, you need to evaluate three areas of your team if you're a head coach. Your players, were your players good enough? Your scheme, was your scheme good enough? And your coaches, were your coaches good enough? And last year for the Clemson game, he kind of deemed it like, no, we were all fine. All three of those, we were fine. We just didn't get the breaks and didn't win. And then they focused on Clemson and they went out and beat them a couple of weeks ago. This one is totally different because they were deficient in every single area last night to Alabama. And this is not a big knock. I mean, this is part and parcel to the fact that Alabama is a great team this year, and that offense is a great team. The defensive game plan was not very good.
I didn't like it.
I thought that they needed to either put 8 in coverage and really blanket those zones in coverage, or send the house.
So that my theory was Mac Jones had not been uncomfortable all year.
Right.
And you probably don't match up with their wide receivers. So give Mac Jones, he has to make quick throw. And if he beats you, he beats you. I mean, they score 50 on everybody. But my takeaway was, you can't let Mac Jones be comfortable.
Right.
And so to me, I was with you. I'm like, just lay it on the line. We don't match up personnel-wise. We don't match up with our receivers at all. So the more time he has, the uglier it'll get, and they gave him all day.
I think one of the things that Alabama did incredibly well all year, and again last night, is that when you just sent one, if you had like a 5-man rush or even just a 6-man rush and tried to play some coverage behind it, they decimated that style of defense because they were too good.
Yeah.
They were just too good. You had to overwhelm their protection to get a free rusher in Mac's face immediately.
Absolutely.
And disrupt the timing of the offense, and they never really did that. Maybe one time it looked like it was kind of an auto blitz on a motion, and he engaged into a blitz, and then Browning knocked the fumble loose, and Ohio State got the score. But that was really the only time Mac had any pressure. And by the way, that was a bootleg. That's not really a protection. He's just kind of booting out, and they put a guy in his face. So I thought that the scheme was insufficient for Alabama's offense last night for Ohio State. And then their players, with the issues that they had with COVID and with injuries, they just weren't good enough last night to beat them.
How do you evaluate Mac Jones? He's living the opposite of the NFL reality.
Yeah.
Always plays with a lead.
Yeah.
I'm throwing on 3rd and 1.
It's so interesting that you bring this up.
Receivers are wide. I mean, it's like, it reminded me of Danny Werfel, although he's a much better prospect than Danny Werfel. But Danny Werfel came out of college. Everybody's like, that's unbelievable. And I'm like, no, they're going 4 wide. The SEC hasn't caught up to it. And his receivers, he's doing lollipop throws up the sideline. There's nobody close. How do you evaluate him?
Well, it's so interesting because you bring up Werfel. You know who I was having this conversation with last night on our watch party? We had our big digital watch party. He jumped in the 4th quarter, and we had this conversation with Matt Leinart, who lived very much this style of existence in college. And Matt was very candid last night in talking about the awakening, the eye-opening difference when he got to the league and the margin of talent was then closed, right? The margin of talent that Mac Jones had, even last night in the national championship game, was substantial.
Look at this. Linebacker on Devontae Smith. Not close.
I feel terrible for Tough Borland there. That was just a regular zone. Everyone's like, why would you put Borland in coverage on Devontae Smith? They weren't trying to. It was just a zone defense. He happened to be the middle linebacker, and Devontae Smith is the inside of the 3 receivers. Having said that, though, Jones was not pressured all that much. So you ask, how do I evaluate? Well, that's certainly part of the evaluation. You have to take that into consideration, the margin of player that he was playing with as opposed to the opposition. Now, having said that, Colin, there are some things that translate for Mac. he plays with a great understanding of the game. You can tell that he has complete control over his game plan. He understands where the defense is. You know that because his eyes are decisive, his feet are decisive, and he throws the football on time and on target. Oh, yeah. Those are things that translate, right? I mean, he's an anticipatory thrower. He throws with great touch. He doesn't have the best arm in the world, but he tends to put the ball in great spots. And when you look at the fact that they had a yak, yards after catch, of second in the country, over 2,000 yards, part of that is the timing and ball placement of the quarterback. The equation for yak, and this goes back to Bill Walsh, by the way. He used to draw this equation up for Rice and Montana and these guys. He said timing plus ball placement equals yards after the catch. That was their equation in the West Coast offense. Well, Mac Jones is responsible for two of those, right? And there's some spacing issues for the wide receivers, but for two of those variables in the equation, that's the quarterback's responsibility, and Mac Jones is really good at those two elements.
All right. Yeah.
I think he's a first-round player.
All right.
I won't be shocked if New England takes him.
Well, they don't have any skill players, so good luck with that. Good luck throwing
That's
into
a
window that's the size of a walnut.
I fully hear that, and I think that has to be taken into consideration.
And people say, you didn't like Burrow. No. I said Burrow was Tony Romo. Tony Romo's a great player in the NFL. I said
he's better than Romo.
Yeah, no, I admit that now. No,
okay.
He is. But that was my comp. My comp is a less athletic Kirk Cousins.
No, Mac is Tony Romo. Burrow's better than Romo. I think Mac Jones is a Tony Romo.
He's not as athletic as...
Yeah, he's just a poor man's Burrow. Just a poor man's Burrow.
He's a homeless man's Burrow. There's no way he's a poor man's Burrow.
I mean,
Joe Burrow is a really active athlete. Really active athlete.
I understand that.
Mac Jones looks...
I didn't say he is Joe Burrow. You're getting all bent out of shape. Mac Jones... Listen,
Joe Burrow's my friend. Watch out. He was on the show this week. We are tight.
And he doesn't wear a backwards hat either.
All right. I don't want to attack Mac Jones. He could be a wonderful person.
He'll be a first-round player.
No, I'm not doubting that. He just looks a little trunky and a little inactive and not real.
Timing plus ball placement equals yards after the catch.
Oh, yakety
Is the ball on time and on target?
All right, let me move to this one.
Go ahead.
Okay. 14 of the last 15 national champions are from the South.
Yeah.
Okay. And
the SEC is dominant.
Okay, so I just want to throw this at you. The media, we are governed by the FCC, the governing body. Drugs, food, governed by the FDA. Wall Street, our 401k, governed by the SEC, ironically. Pro football, a commissioner, rules, good teams, tougher schedule, bad draft picks. College football, unlike pro sports, has no interest in making it competitive.
It's true.
And everything in America, people are complaining now that tech doesn't have a governing, ruling body. And by the way, some of those complaints are very realistic on Facebook, and nothing against them, but those are real complaints that they can just say you can't be on our accounts, right? So I look at college football and I think it's a $10 billion annual industry. There's no CEO. The schedules are total. I went to this morning. This guy does his homework. Next year, Alabama plays something called Mercer, New Mexico State, Southern Miss, and by the way, they get buys right before Auburn. It's like,
yes,
come on, we got to have somebody make a schedule.
You're preaching to the choir here. I have said several times on this show that college football behaves exactly like our country behaved after the Revolutionary War and before the Constitutional Convention. Okay, before we actually had a federal government,
right?
We were just 13 colonies behaving however they wanted to. Some would adhere to international law, others weren't. And what were they doing? They were behaving in their own self-interest. Well, we have 5 Power 5 conferences that behave and act in their own self-interest. And what's hard in football, as opposed to maybe even college basketball, is that the playoff is owned by the conferences. So that means, guess who the most powerful people in the sport are? The 5 Power 5 commissioners.
And by the way, and 2 of them, one of them, the SEC, has the most power.
Yes.
Because they have the most television revenue and the most draw.
Not only that, but Greg Sankey, the commissioner of the SEC, is going to have even more power now because of the way that they were able to play through this fall.
Yes.
Larry Scott and Kevin Warren are going to lose a lot of any equity that they had within the sport if they had much at all to begin with. They're the Big Ten and the Pac-12. And then the other guy that's going to carry a lot of weight is Bob Bowlesby in the Big 12 because of how he handled everything this fall. But getting back to the point, they have no incentive to change.
That's right.
Now, having said that, the SEC is starting to get so dominant that you're starting to see some of the other commissioners coalesce and start to say, hey, you know what? This is actually not good because this is not the Power Five. This is just like we're continuing to prop up the SEC.
It's the Power One.
It's the Power One. You're exactly right. With a couple of schools that can sometimes compete with that conference.
Kind of.
In ACC and Clemson and Ohio State.
I love the sport, but listen, this is how UFC caught up to boxing.
I agree.
Dana White, a centralized voice.
Here's the problem. Let me give you an analogy. Let me just create a scenario.
Okay.
Let's paint a scenario.
All right.
Okay. My biggest issue with college football is the burden of proof. Okay, you might be wondering, just bear with me for a second. We have two standards of burden of proof in our country. Criminal cases and civil cases.
Right.
One is beyond a reasonable doubt in a criminal case, and one is the preponderance of the evidence. If you don't know what that means, that basically means like if there's a greater than 50% chance, then you can get a ruling in a civil case.
Yeah.
So those are two different burdens of proof. Well, the top of college football right now has a lower burden of proof. It's like a civil case. It's like the preponderance of the. Do we think Alabama is one of the four best? Yeah, probably. So guess what? They don't necessarily have to win their division. They don't have to win every single game.
And they can schedule 3 cupcakes.
And it doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter.
Now, I would say in Alabama's case, and I've defended the SEC for years on this, I think there's more great high school football players and programs in the footprint of the South.
And Texas.
So the same people, a Southern football fan will hear us today and say, why should we balance it out? And I would say this. Our federal government every year sends Kentucky $9 billion because the state can't live without it. New York has to send the federal government $10 billion because they have a surplus. Translation, our government protects states. So the Southerners who go, why should we be even? Our federal government sends states big checks if they feel they can't run sufficiently a state without federal funding. Point being is we have these protective mechanisms all over America.
It's true.
Media, law, sports, Wall Street.
The judicial system.
Yes.
And by the way, so if you're Iowa State, like Iowa State next year is going to be really good. I think that they could start in the top 10, right? Yeah. They got Brock Purdy back, Breece Hall back.
Good quarterback.
Iowa State is going to be really good.
Yeah.
The burden of proof is on them. They're going to have to win every single game in order to go to the playoff. Right? They don't get this benefit of the doubt. It's not the preponderance of the evidence. They have to be beyond a reasonable doubt one of the four best, even to get in. So I think that we need to increase the pathways in college football for teams to get included into the playoffs.
All right, let's see it.
Okay, so here is a 14-team playoff model. And I would just say, before I get into the playoff real quick, this goes along with a few assumptions. Colin, I think that we should do away with divisions in every conference so that the top 2 teams would play in a conference championship game. I also believe that we should tier teams for your non-conference game and schedule a Power 5 opponent for you. So the best teams get tiered together and they have to play quality opponents. You don't get the schedule like you mentioned with Alabama next season. Having said that, I believe that Group of 5 teams should get an automatic bid if they win the best Group of 5 champion, which would be Cincinnati. And this model, 14, here's what it does. It rewards the best 2 teams in the country with a bye.
I totally agree with this. It also eliminates Bama against a 14 seed.
That's exactly right. And so you avoid a massive blowout. You reward the best 2 teams, and you make their conference championship games meaningful for them because they still have to win in order to get a bye. So you're stretching out the meaning of some of those games down the stretch. Then you've got these other 6 games out there. You're going to play it on campus, which I think would be amazing. You play on campus. Now, for this argument, I took the 6 champions, 5 Power 5 champions, best Group of 5 champions, and I actually seeded them 1 through 6 based on, and here's another change, Colin, I would do away with the committee. Go back to the BCS style of ranking teams where you have more inputs, a larger equation that I think would be less bias inherent. And so this is what it would look like.
Okay,
well,
what's
the first
that?
2 rounds on campus.
Okay, some of it I like a lot. Who's that 12 seed?
Let's see. That's Coastal. Based on the BCS, they would be in. Based on those
They
standings,
lost
they would
to
be in.
Liberty.
Based on those standings, they would be in.
Well, then let's blow this algorithm up. Coastal Carolina can't make it.
We can talk about, and that's part of the, we can talk and debate about what style of ranking system would be better. I think that we should incorporate some computers and then have a couple of committees for human polls, right? So I wouldn't leave it to the AP and the coaches poll. I mean, Dabo had Ohio State 11th, for goodness sake. So we can talk about how we rank teams, but this is just an example of what you could get. You would have 6 games on the opening week of the playoffs. They would be on campus. The second round would be back on campus, higher seed host. And I think that we would have more interest in college football. North Carolina would be in. Florida would be in. All these teams. A&M would be in.
I don't mind having Cincinnati sneaking in there. I like Indiana's in there. That'd be fun against Texas A&M. I'm for all this stuff here.
Except for Coastal.
Well,
you don't want to see Coastal. Well, that's just part of the equation. We can debate about the equation.
This is the bigs. You can't throw a 72-mile-an-hour fastball past me.
Greg Maddox begs to differ.
I rake that thing right in the right field.
I got the
double.
By the way, in an inner squad, Greg Maddox, I actually hit off of Greg Maddox one time. So I was a minor league baseball player in former life.
That day he was sick. He had influenza. He was very tired that day.
I didn't get a hit. That's what I'm trying to tell you. His fastball broke a foot. It looked like a slider. And it was like, that was kind of slow, and it slid. I was like, was that a fastball? And he was like, yeah, that was a fastball. I was like, well, I can't hit that.
And then you went into the glamorous job of local radio before you became an icon. Weren't you big in Colorado Springs? Klatt and Jenkins in the morning on 92.4.
You know, one of my shows was with Charles Johnson, who was the backup quarterback for Colorado. Came in for Darian Hagan when they won the Orange Bowl to win the national championship. CJ and Klatt talked a lot of Buffs. Very big in Boulder.
I bet you
CJ,
were.
I love you, brother.
In the mornings.
No, it wasn't. It was.
Did you have sound effects?
It was like zany? 9 to noon on the third best sports talk
one
radio
of those shows
show
that nobody listens to.
That's exactly right.
You were so far down the AM dial, you were right next to the glove compartment. I could have just pushed your show into the glove compartment.
Real quick, do you know what I did one day? I prank called the governor of Nebraska.
Oh, that's a good call.
I didn't realize that you couldn't put somebody on without letting them know they were on the radio.
So you got fired from that lame job.
Basically, I did.
Well, that's it's worked out well for you, Don.
You know what? It worked out.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for watching. Subscribe here to get the latest from the show. Also, be sure to check out more of the best clips from The Herd or go watch a few segments from other shows on FS1.